Danielle Smith says, did you know it's easier for Canadian provinces to trade with European countries than with each other? This is true. And I've got some numbers on this. It's time Canada eliminates interprovincial trade barriers so that Canadian families, businesses, and our national economy can weather this incoming trade dispute with the United States. I was pulling up some numbers before we came on air. All told, non-geographic internal trade barriers in Canada add up to a tariff equivalent of 21%. That's pretty close to that 25%. And that's the International Monetary Fund estimates that. So this is like an outside looking in. The International Monetary Fund says the benefits of removing these internal trade barriers would be huge. It estimates that if trade in goods was fully liberalized, real gross domestic product per capita would increase by 4% nationally, with the internal trade volumes rising to the level of Canada's internal trade. Labor mobility would increase, boosting employment in the Atlantic provinces by 6%. It would take a big chunk out of the unemployment rate there. Removing trade barriers would also boost international trade by providing easier access to the entire Canadian market. This is something that the CFIB has been talking about forever and ever. Over the decades, because of these internal trade barriers, companies have just given up with trying to access other markets inside the country. So over the decades, interprovincial trade has declined relative to international trade from 50% to 40%. So companies are just saying, you know what, it doesn't even matter. I'm not even going to bother trying to sell into Saskatchewan because I can't. I'll just sell to the Montanans.
Yeah, exactly. And you have Danielle Smith here, who has just completely bypassed the media and kind of became the media on her own right. And she's posted an op-ed here in the National Post where she says how Team Canada can overcome Trump tariffs. So in addition to highlighting those interprovincial barriers and the interprovincial trade issues, she has taken here to the National Post, where I think it's about a third of the way down the page. She said, although I appreciate the need for this proportionate response, which are, the retaliatory tariff measures that is being taken by the Team Canada approach, she says a tariff war with the United States will hurt millions of Canadian families, workers, and businesses. As Premier of Alberta, I am calling on my fellow premiers, the Prime Minister, as he stands currently, I suppose, and all of our national leaders to de-escalate the rhetoric as much as possible and look to diplomacy and advocacy as our primary tool to resolve this conflict. And then later on, she says that's why she's planning to return to Washington, D.C. twice more this month to participate in the Republican Governors Convention, visit with dozens of elected and administrative officials. Well, she'll never stop telling Alberta and Canada's story to their friends and allies south of the border. And also she says this calm, logical discussion is far more effective than tough guy rhetoric when dealing with a misguided ally who has wronged us. And, it's quite the essay for anybody who wants to go in and read it all. But I mean, let's let cooler heads prevail. Stop escalating this tension with our closest ally and trade partner and figure out what's going to work. I mean, if Mexico can do it, why in the heck can't we?
Right. Well, it has to do with Mexico having 10,000 deployment ready soldiers. And I'm quite certain we don't have that, and that it should hang around Justin Trudeau's neck like a millstone. But Danielle Smith also says, I encourage all elected Canadian leaders to do the same, to tell your stories, to reach out to the other side. Instead, Justin Trudeau is dividing Canadians. He's dividing us from our American friends and allies. Danielle Smith says the Canadian-U.S. friendship with the American people is far more important and enduring than any one person. We would do well to remember that. Yes. But again, we're led by leaders and that are idiots, and here we are.
And then we have another video here from Poilievre saying that he will continue to march forward as proud Canadians. The thing with some of these videos that are being put out is that this is changing so quickly that you see pretty much almost in real time a lot of
Yeah.
these videos and clips going stale, but also as things change, just this morning, as Mexico and the US reach a negotiation deal and the tariffs are paused for a month because of the actions they are immediately taking to secure the border and stop the crossing of illegal fentanyl, just in general, into the US. You see now Polyev comes out with that, leaning more on the Alberta model. And so some of these clips already, I'm wondering if they're already getting stale after these leaders have seen the way that things have unfolded in the Mexico relationship.
Sure.
So maybe in that regard, I'll skip over that video, and I'd like to throw to this one by Saskatchewan Premier Scott Moe, who has been really the only one to back Smith. It took him about a week or two to get his bearings.
Got there.
Yeah, but he eventually came around. He did sign on with the Team Canada stuff, but then I think he saw Smith stick her neck out and take a different path, and he came around. So we have this small clip from him just this morning.
No one wants to be in the situation that we currently find ourselves. Likely the most challenging situation in recent history, and certainly may well be one of the most challenging situations that we've seen since we've last been involved in any actual wartime conflict. This is going to have an impact on our agricultural producers up and down the supply chain in the ag industry in Saskatchewan. It will have an impact on our miners up and down the supply chain as well, all of those involved in the mining industry, whatever the product might be, our oil and energy workers, as well as our retailers in our urban centers and in our communities across this province. This will have an impact, and I would implore on our federal government to work alongside the provinces as they have been, but to ensure they are always looking at options like we saw in Mexico this morning to have these tariffs removed, if it even is for a short period of time, so that we can further our engagement and further the integration and further the opportunity that we have to implore on one individual, President Trump, that seems bent on using these tariffs in some way, shape, or form to destabilize the investment environment that we have in North America, to destabilize the energy and food security that we have been able to acquire in North America over the course of the last number of decades and maybe even the century, and the significant role that Saskatchewan plays in this. And again, I would just say that everything that we do as leaders, political leaders, business leaders, community leaders, needs to be focused on the long term. It needs to be focused on de-escalating the conversation around imposing tariffs on one another, de-escalating the conversation around harmfully reducing the opportunity that we have in that strong, growing, and vibrant North American economy, and focusing on ensuring that these tariffs are removed as soon as possible, like it appears they may have been for a period of time in Mexico this morning. So.
Yeah, the only thing I would say about Scott Moe's comments are that Trudeau is directly responsible for destabilizing investment in this country with their woke, DEI, energy, sustainability, sustainable development goal aligning strategies and policies. That has driven investment and innovation out of this country, not what Trump is doing. I would argue that what Trump is doing is simply shining a light on it. And unfortunately, until our political leaders get a grip and realize that Canadians have been calling on them to do all of the things that Trump is also asking them to do with these tariffs, we're kind of the ones who will suffer the most consequences. And it's really sad for the Canadian people, I think. And as Trump mentioned in one of those earlier clips, I like the Canadian people, but I don't agree with the leadership. And I am all here for that.
You know what? If I were Scott Moe, my next phone call, my first phone call would be to Danielle Smith to say, hey, when you're in Washington, can I come? And can we together meet Brooke Rollins? Now, Brooke Rollins is a Trump's pick for ag secretary, head of the USDA. And he should go there and make the case on behalf of the Canadian potash industry. Now, Saskatchewan is the #1 potash producer in the world. And the other countries of the world have some serious human rights problems. If you are going to up the cost of Canadian potash, that'll send you into the arms of Russia. Now, Canada produces more than double what Russia produces in potash per year. So that should tell you how much potash we have and how important the potash industry is in Saskatchewan, not just to Canadian agriculture, but to the stability of the food chain around the world. Because if you don't get it from Canada, you're getting it from Russia, then China, then Belarus. So the top, Germany comes in with like a fraction as number 5. So of the top 4 of them are kind of not great on the human rights issue. And then there's us in Saskatchewan being some of the friendliest people on the planet. So Brooke Rollins is the USDA secretary. Scott Moe should be meeting with her and saying, look, these tariffs are going to increase the cost of the inputs for the American farmer. And the American farmer is either going to have to eat that cost, which a lot of times you have to, because you take your price from the world market, you don't set it. So it's going to make farmers poorer if their input costs grow up, or in some instances, that cost will be passed along down to the consumer. So you're going to have poor people in the United States facing food insecurity because you are adding a 25% tariff to our potash. So for our sake and for the sake of the American people, let's drop the potash tariff. That's, if I were Scott Moe, that's the first thing I would be doing, like today. Call Danielle Smith, say, you're going to talk to the governors, I'm going to. Let's talk to Brooke Rollins and let's see what we can do to plead our case. Do not leave this up to the Trudeau government, because they don't know anything about farmers.
Absolute disaster. Yeah, let's focus on building that relationship and building that rapport and moving forward as, renewed allies and a united front. But President Trump, as we see pretty much in real time, I think this is about 10 minutes ago, his communications advisor in the White House posted this 40-second clip of him still saying and wanting Canada to become the 51st state.
Look, what I'd like to see, Canada become our 51st state. We give them protection, military protection. We don't need them to build our cars. I'd rather see Detroit or South Carolina or any one of our, Tennessee, any one of our states build the cars. They could do it very easily. We don't need them for the cars. We don't need them for lumber. We don't need them for anything. We don't need them for energy. We have more energy than they do. We don't need them for energy.
You don't.
So I say, why are we doing this? Why are we willing to lose between $100 billion and $200 billion a year? We don't need them. As a state, it's different. Look.
I don't know. I think that Trump also sees a vast resource land here in Canada, and he's definitely downplaying the amount that Americans, as you've already pointed out, Sheila, the amount of oil and gas that energy Americans do rely on. And I think he sees that we are just a vast land of pretty much untouched natural resources. And so Trump is a businessman. He's thinking about this from a purely business, monetary, what is best to capitalize on on Canada as a country. And so, I take that 51st state with a massive grain of salt. I'm not saying that, hey, we can't have a conversation of how the countries can work together and build a more robust, united front, maybe, a North American strategy and that was supposed to be kind of the whole point of the USMCA, that trade deal that was negotiated back in 2020. And so I think that there is definitely a lot of space there to have renewed discussion and build that relationship back to where it was. But this nonsense of hitting back with dollar for dollar tariffs and escalating these tensions is not it. This is not a Team Canada approach, no matter how many times they try to throw that verbiage out there. This is going to hurt Canadians. And I think the more Trump kind of trolls Canada, as though we will eventually become the 51st state, I mean, that would be massive. Just even think about it logically. Canada would have to be broken up into multiple little states if that were to ever come to fruition. And our
don't take
videographer,
this the wrong way. Don't take this the wrong way, but I don't want to be in a state with with Ontario. Like,
that's just it. Yeah, we're too vast to be just one state lumped in together.